As you all find your seats, I want to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Philip Jenkins is a professor, the distinguished professor of history, and the director of the program on historical studies of religion at Baylor University, and most importantly, he's a parishioner. So we are really glad to welcome Dr. Jenkins here to teach again. He will be teaching today over the anniversary, the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicea. So before he teaches, let us open in prayer. The Lord be with you. Almighty God, we thank you for the things that you give to us, including our intellect and people among us that show you in ways that we don't expect and in ways that we can't see ourselves. Lord, be with us as we learn from one another and as we learn from Dr. Jenkins. We pray all these things in your Son's holy name. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I hope we get audio without too much feedback. Are we good? Okay. Even if you know nothing about the Synod, the Council of Nicea, you know the Nicene Creed. You say it every week. And people have been saying it in different ways for 1,700 years, which is a while, which is a long story. We're in an anniversary year, in 325. A good number of the leaders of the Christian church gathered at a place called Nicaea, which is these days what we call a suburb, a city very near Istanbul in Turkey. And they made a decision, and when they'd made their decision, they all gathered for a group photograph, and you can see that one. And they actually have the text of the creed underneath. And what you might just be able to figure out is that we've got two clergy on each side, two patriarchs, and in the middle, you've got an emperor. You've got the Emperor Constantine. And that's one of the things that's very important about Nicaea. The Christian church had only just been legalized. It still wasn't the official state religion. It had been decriminalized, if you like. So you could be a Christian without being executed. And the Emperor Constantine was very much by trial and error trying to figure out how this church and state thing would work. And what he did influenced things for the next, well, certainly 1,500 years, up to the 20th century. And the text we came up with is one group of words I'm going to concentrate on because it's going to be very important. We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father. And he moved to this bit, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. Now, underneath I've written that Greek word for of one being, because I'm going to be coming back to it a lot. Homoousion, the same being, the same substance. And right away, it does kind of send a message to you. You don't say someone is begotten, not made, unless you're arguing with people who say he was made. Okay? So there's a certain amount of argument in this. Council of Nicea is very important in one way. It attracts so many myths and legends. Look, we like big dates. We like, 1945, okay? These are the dates at which we have turning points in our classes, our curricula, up to 1945, after 1945. 325 is the same. And what people have done through the centuries is taken everything they think matters in the history of Christianity and said that it either begins or ends in 325. So, for example, you're all familiar with the idea of all these miscellaneous alternative gospels that circulated in the early church, and you read people saying, oh yes, they circulated very freely until Constantine laid down the law and burnt them all. So the idea is before Nicaea is, and if you could just cue Star Wars movie here, before the dark time, before the empire. And for all the books that are published on theology, where are we? We even have a series of books that are called the Nicene Fathers, the ones who are before Nicaea. There's before Nicaea, after Nicaea. And for all the books that have ever been written about early Christian theology, the one that's had most influence in this century is the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. I would defend that statement. And you have Mr. Teabing here saying, until that moment in history, Jesus was viewed by his followers as a mortal prophet, a great and powerful man, but a man nonetheless immortal, not the Son of God. Right. Jesus' establishment as Son of God was officially proposed and voted on by the Council of Nicea. Hold on, you're saying Jesus' divinity was the result of a vote? Well, a relatively close vote at that, Teabing added. Now, every word in that is wrong, including on, okay? It's all wrong. Even if you stand by what he said, then the vote was 298 to 2, which is not close, all right? But anyway, let's just take that for an argument. And if you read Da Vinci Code, you'll go on to read about how the Council of Nicea also suppressed all the alternative gospels, which it didn't even discuss them. It did all these bad things. Anything you want to have happened, whether it's good or bad, you say, it's 325, it's Nicea. And there's like an alternative myth, which is what you might call an orthodox myth, that goes something like this. The early church had its ideas that were very kind of Trinitarian and orthodox, and along comes this bad man called Arius, and if you want to hiss at that point, you can. Yeah, exactly. Called Arius, who comes up with this terrible doctrine which says this Trinity thing is nonsense. We don't believe that at all. We don't believe that Christ is equal to the Father. And then all the good Orthodox people get together at Nicaea, and they enforce the law, and Arius is kicked out of the church. What I'd like to do is try and offer maybe something of a more balanced story of what actually happens. Now, if you think about it, the Trinity, no offense to anyone, is an odd doctrine. 1 in 3, 3 in 1. What's the balance? There's a play that was written some years ago where you have a young high school kid, and he's asking his religion teacher, what do I need to know? And the teacher says, well, do you have any problems with faith? Well, the Trinity, sir, I don't understand it. And the teacher says, oh, ask your math master. 1 in 3, 3 in 1, very straightforward. It's a simple kind of math issue. And you can go two ways with it. You can take the Trinity and make it too much about the unity, and in which case it makes one God with no difference between the individual three characters. Or you can go the other way and make them into three gods, which in early times is sort of possible. In the 3rd century, people get very concerned about this idea of making it one God. And there's a man called Sabellius, who I'm going to be coming back to. And Sabellius says, there's one God. He manifests in different ways, in different times, but basically it's all 3 modes, 3 faces of one God. There's no real difference. And in a sense, that produces an idea which is very much like the kind of Old Testament Jewish God, who is one, but it does away with any sense of differentiation. So when you have Christ on earth, in that view, it's kind of God the Father walking around. When Christ is crucified, isn't that God the Father being crucified? And so Sabellius is this very kind of unpopular guy who has this very radical doctrine. And now I'm just going to come to the man himself. This is Arius. And this is a 15th century picture of him. Thank you for the hiss. And what it says is Arius, heresiarch of the 4th century. So he's not even a heretic, he's a heresiarch. He's a ruling heretic. He is the top heretic. And when people write about Arius and heretics in later centuries, they always take Arius as the model bad guy. If you look in your Dante, he is way at the bottom of the pit. He has special night and day access to Satan and his anger. He's a very bad guy. And he's the main one who they list as a bad guy. So Arius is a very senior person. What does he say, and what creates so much fuss? Well, first of all, Arius is a North African. He belongs to a people who are the Berbers, who are the indigenous people of North Africa before the Romans arrived. And you may say, I've never heard of Berbers, to which I say, well, you've certainly heard of some Berbers. You've heard of St. Augustine a little bit later, and you've heard of St. Monica, who has her own room down the corridor. And these people are Berbers. They're the native North African people. Arius was a Berber. And Arius, in reality, was famous for being very pious, very intellectual, and I'd love to be able to quote more about him. But please remember, one thing that happens in religious debate in this era is when you lose absolutely everything you ever wrote gets burnt, destroyed. How serious are they? There is a death penalty for possessing any of the documents. Would anybody like to guess why we don't know so much about Arius personally? Okay, look, it's a laundry list. No, it was burnt. They destroyed it all. By the way, one other name of local relevance, the person who's done the best scholarship on Arius in recent times is Rowan Williams, who will be visiting shortly. And he wrote this wonderful book about Arius and Arianism. And what he basically shows, not so much about what we do know, as what we can't know. Okay? But what we do know is this. Arius is fighting for orthodoxy, and he's very concerned about the people who take the Trinity idea and take it too far in the direction of one God, the people who are like Sibelius, and he will fight for this. He's in Egypt, and Egypt is what can I call it? It's an intellectual hothouse. What they used to say about Alexandria in the ancient world is Alexandrians believe the sun rises just for them. And in terms of theology, that's pretty accurate. We do the theology of the whole world extending to the suburbs of Alexandria. There's a place over there called Rome or Carthage, but they don't matter. Okay? And all the arguments in Alexandria. Within Alexandria, he has to fight some people who are quite dangerous. People who believe that when you read about Christ in the New Testament, you are reading about one God. God who appears on earth is an illusion, has no material reality. And these people are agnostics, they're Manichaeans. And Arius fights them very hard. And what he's desperately trying to do is to reassert this idea of the Trinity, the three persons in the deity. And that often means he has to get like a hair's breadth of difference between them. And then one day, he has a new patriarch in Alexandria, whose name is, what else? Alexander, of course. And Alexander gives a sermon which basically explains that, well, there's this Trinity thing, but really it's all one, and there aren't any real distinctions. And that is a model of the very roof that Arius went through at that point. And Arius is furious and says, no, that's heresy. That's Sibelius. You can't do that. And so within Alexandria, people start taking sides. And Arius is a very, very good preacher. He's an organizer. He's a recruiter. Oh, one other thing. I mentioned the Patriarch of Alexandria. Be aware of a couple of things. How powerful they are. They are actually, if you read ancient documents, they're the only other person in the world outside Rome who are called popes. They're not patriarchs, they're popes of Alexandria. Alexandria used to be an imperial city run by the pharaohs, and those patriarchs know it. And they keep acting like emperors. Okay? And they have no sense of the divide between religious and secular. Does not exist, no world of separation. So there is a war going on between Arius and his boss. Arius is, by this point, is a priest. And Arius is doing very well indeed. He makes a lot of converts to his position, and he starts setting up what you can only call a separate church. He starts ordaining people himself, which he should not be doing. He then faces a deadly enemy, who is a man called Athanasius. And Athanasius, his official title is something like archdeacon, but it helps if you think of him by his real title, which is attack dog of the patriarch. And those two, Athanasius and Arius, begin a war that goes on for several years. And there are councils here and councils there. Arius spreads his rival church, which really emphasizes this idea of Christ being begotten after the Father, not at the same time, throughout a large part of North Africa, of the Near East. And what he's teaching is this: look, we have to treat the Trinity seriously. Yes, God the Father and God the Son are both divine. There's no doubt about that. But there was a time before God the Father generated God the Son. And it might have been nanoseconds, but there was a time. God the Son was generated by the Father after the initial creation. And if you are arguing at the time, then what you would say is, okay, so he's defending the Trinity. And he also has one thing going for him, which is what he's saying is not new. In fact, he's a very conservative guy. If you look at all the early Christian writers that we know about, all the famous ones, Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, they all say the same thing. The position that ends up being called Arianism, which is this deadly heresy, is what all senior Christian writers believe up to that point. And it's an interesting fact about how we tell the story of religious change. We assume that somebody like Arius must have come in with this daring, novel idea. No, he doesn't. He just holds the old idea, and circumstances have changed. So you have this deadly split around the world, which is threatening to turn into two different churches. And then enter this man, and that's kind of an unfortunate image. And it's a statue, a head of the Emperor Constantine, and it's meant to be seen from a distance, but close up. Doesn't it make him look threatening? Shall we say non-intellectual and thuggish? And yeah, that, to some extent. You've got to feel sorry for Constantine. He believes he has got a mission to rule the empire. He's got a mission to work with the church, and he's thinking exactly how to do it. Does that mean, well, I'm surrounding myself with bishops to advise me? It's not a Christian empire yet, but I'm moving in that direction. And now we have this terrible split off in Palestine and Egypt and all these other areas. So I'm going to do something no one's ever done before. I'm going to set up a council. And in fact, we're going to devise a whole set of words for it. It's going to be a council for the whole world, oikomene, ecumenical. It's going to be an ecumenical council, and we're going to call in all the leading clergy of all the Christian world, which in practice means everywhere in the East. So you have places like Spain and Gaul and Britain and Germany and all these places that speak Latin, and we're not going to bother much with them. So there are probably 300 bishops attend, like 5 attend from the West. Don't ask me how many attend from Alexandria and the suburbs. A lot, because that is where Christianity happens. And then you get this man, Athanasius, who will lead the charge at the council. And what it actually says is Athanasius the Great, and it was something he was very, very conscious of. How can I describe him? To know him was to want to punch him. He served as Patriarch of Alexandria from 328 to 373, and you think, whoa, 45 years, that's a really long time in office. For about half of that, he was off in 5 separate exiles, because he would turn up, Athanasius, say something diplomatic. He would open his mouth. Next exile. Have you tried the Rhineland yet? Well, you're about to. He's a very determined guy. And he believes that Arius, although Arius is teaching what is basically ancient Christian doctrine, has lapsed into this terrible heresy. And what Athanasius does is he portrays him as believing dreadful ideas. The Son is not really God. Christ is not really God. And Arius is guilty of these terrible heresies. And if you go look up Athanasius' ideas, how they're expressed, you'll find them in dozens and dozens of very large volumes. And if you want to look at what Arius said in response, you won't, because they've all been burnt, and there was the death penalty for anyone who had the documents. So we tend to see the argument in a slightly one-sided way. Well, we get the council. It meets at Nicea in 325, and it's something that's never happened before. It's all the Christians, leaders of, not the whole world, but most of the world, and they gather together, and they have this great discussion about absolutely core issues. But the key one is you have Arius here, you have Athanasius here, and Arius is presenting his idea, which is, look, I'm trying to defend the Trinity. I'm trying to say that the Son is generated or created after the beginning of time. Okay? And Athanasius says, no, that's absolutely unacceptable. I'm not going to go into this in any great detail, but if you look at the New Testament, you can find a lot of different arguments to support whichever side you want. We had that thing about, wait a moment, so this idea that Jesus was divine, that was the vote of the Council of Nicea. Why, yes, my dear. In the Da Vinci Code. Well, you look in the New Testament, you find the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Sin was in the beginning with God. Okay, cancel the council, everyone goes home. We've settled the argument. You have the story of doubting Thomas, and Thomas said, my Lord and my God. The idea that Christ is God does not just show up at Nicea. But then you've got any number of other quotes in the Bible that seem to show that Christ is indeed lesser than the Father. About that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. And he hasn't told me. If you loved me, you would be glad that I am going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. Arius loves that one. And also, if you look at the book of Acts, for instance, we have these early Christians, and they're trying to explain who Christ was. They all know Christ is God. They all know Christ is divine. But many of them suggest that Christ achieved that divine status at a particular time, not from the beginning. So, for example, they use these psalms, and the quotes were originally applicable to ancient kings, but they apply them to Christ. You are my son, says God. This day I have begotten you. They love that one. And Arius finds it very easy to turn up all these quotes. They love the story, the text of the book of Proverbs, where you have wisdom speaking, and wisdom is like the first draft of the word, the logos, the idea of the Son. The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. So I go back pretty close to the beginning, but not to the very beginning. Maybe there were a few nanoseconds before I was created, but I was created. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but the point I'm trying to make is Arius is not evidently wrong, even if he is wrong. And I'm not even going to mention this. Paul talks about Christ being declared to be the Son of God with power. Now, this is an image I really like. What actually happened at the council? How do you know you've had a bad day? When you are Arius and you are arguing, and another bishop gets up and punches you, and that bishop is Santa Claus. I don't make this up. That's St. Nicholas of Myra punching Arius. And when he'd been punched up by Santa Claus, things have gone wrong. So when Arius turns up at the council, he's got 20, 40, 50 supporters. We don't know exactly. But pretty soon it's obvious Constantine is not going to take any argument. And virtually everyone who turns up at the event supporting Arius changes their mind. No, Constantine, our most wise and pious emperor, whatever you want, I'll sign. And they also are so happy to accept Constantine that they eventually sign off this text called the Nicene Creed with 2 dissenting votes out of 300. But Constantine has done something to that creed, and he's been reading his, boy's book of theology or something, and he's come across a word that he insists on having in the creed that nobody wants and nobody knows is going to happen. So he says, in this creed, by the way, I want to be clear that it says, of one being with the Father. And you can hear 298 people all simultaneously going, because that word, which you lot say every week, is homoousios, which is the word invented by Sibelius to show there wasn't really a Trinity, and it was all just one God. And they all smile and say, sure, we'll sign that. And they argue about that for the next few weeks. No, it's not the next few weeks, it's the next 350 years. But eventually, they establish this word homoousios, which they definitely did not plan going in. And it's only because Constantine knows about it, likes it. I'm the Roman emperor. You can debate it with me and my 5,000 picked warriors if you wish. Sure, we'll do it. Well, what happened to Arius? That's the other part of it. And of course, what happened was, and this story lasts through the Middle Ages, one day he went to a public toilet in Constantinople where his bowels exploded. And that's the lower part of the picture, and I don't make this up. What could be worse than being punched by Santa Claus? Your bowels could explode in a public toilet in Constantinople, where for 1,000 years after, there is a big stone pillar commemorating the site. I'm running low on time, but oh yeah, isn't that a great title for an academic article? The Legend of Arius' Death, Imagination, Space, and Filth in Late Ancient Historiography. And just one final thing before I wind up here. There is a group called the Ligonier Institute, and they do, every couple of years, they do a survey of popular theology. And they give people statements and say, do you agree with this? Strongly, not so strongly, do you disagree? I love this one. This is from, I think, the 2022 one. Do you agree with this statement? Jesus is the first and greatest being created by God. Now, I'm not going to ask you what you think about this, because you know this is Arianism, heresy, hiss. But when you do that, thank you, when you do this nationally, 60 to 70% of all church-going Christians agree with it. The most, which means they're all Arians. In America today, something like 60% of mainliners, Episcopalians, Lutherans, so on, it reaches close to 70% with Catholics. And I remember telling this to another Episcopal rector friend who basically blanched and said, what are we doing wrong? But the point is, Arian ideas are not that weird. In a sense, they're natural, they're accessible, they make sense to us. And so that many people agree with them. Now look, what I've done, I'm going to do this as a two-part thing. So what I've got to the point is where the Council of Nicea has met, Arius dies shortly afterwards, and they've got this statement, this Nicene Creed, which is absolutely fine and perfect, and nothing is wrong with it, apart from the fact it's got a very large theological bombshell in the middle of it, which is this thing about homoousios, of one substance. What on earth are they going to do? And the answer is, this Council of Nicea, which we all cherish today, and we turn up to meetings at St. Albans Church, basically vanished for a couple of decades after, while people said, thank heaven we're over that one. And yet here we are. And next time it'll be the Council of Nicea Part 2. And what I'd like to do right now is I'll wind up there and I'll throw open for any questions that people might have. And, applications for being arch heretic, no heresy. Please.
All the documents
Yep.
How do we know
His thoughts.
his
How do we know his thoughts? Because what we do have is what Athanasius says, for example. And Athanasius will say, oh, you evil person, you have written, and then you'll get a quote. And so you can put things together from that. Is he quoting honestly? Sometimes not. But we have enough people quoting. But that's a problem you have all the way when you're dealing with any heresy. The Roman Empire does not believe in freedom of speech. Not nearly and not close. They believe in destroying all documents. And you have to work it out. And you have to be somebody like Ron Williams, who's very good at putting together really obscure documents and comments from around the place and trying to figure out who Arius is. And by the way, I won't try and speak for him on this, but by the time he'd finished, I think he was very much more impressed by Arius than when he started his book. And he really saw it as a two-sided conflict. And please, sorry.
We have a mic.
Yeah.
Right here.
Gentleman in the middle there.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh, that's frightening.
Thank you. I try.
Can you say something, because I don't know much about this, but about Constantine's wife and son? They apparently sort of were friends with Arius, and then so when Constantine dies and the son becomes president, then Athanasius has to run and hide in the desert with Saint Anthony, and that's why we have nice book about Saint Anthony.
That's very much what I'm talking about.
Say something about that.
Sure, that's very much what I'm going to be talking about. There's a wonderful set of books about Constantine's wife, who is Helena, whose great achievement in history was supposedly finding the true cross. Constantine's son was called Constantius, and he was raised and taught by one of Arius's best friends. And so they were determined to try and reverse Nicaea. And like I say, that's what I'm going to be talking about next time. Helena is a very important woman. A lot of the people who are the main actors in this whole controversy are actually women. Arius is at the middle of a circuit of very educated, wealthy women. I don't think Helena herself was too close to Arius, but Constantine was very, very close to one of his big colleagues and pupils. And Constantius did his level best to try and overthrow Nicaea. And by the way, it's a little intellectual challenge. If you're going to try and get rid of the Council of Nicea, what would you do? Well, you could just say null and void. Or else you could do what they actually do, which is try and change odd words. So it's the same essence of the same being. And the first try is of a sort of similar-ish being. And I'm only barely paraphrasing with that. Anyone else? Yeah.
I might need some help on the facts on this because my memory may not be that good. But Athanasius and I think Sibelius were famous for arguing about whether man is sin or whether he becomes that. Was that at the Council of Nicea?
No. And Sibelius is like a significantly earlier period. That sort of covers a very large debate. I mainly know those debates in the context of Augustine, who is a bit later, and so I can't really answer that one. I don't think Athanasius so much. Athanasius wrote on a great many things, but I can't speak to that, I fear. Yeah.
You mentioned that it was 398 to 2. So who was the other person besides Arius, and what happened to him? And if the bowel situation hadn't happened, like, would Arius have been like kicked out of the council? And what happened to his churches?
Yeah, Arius's churches are all kind of lost and taken over. There is one other guy we happen to know, and I like to think if this was a modern gathering, this is somebody who accidentally leaned on the wrong button. And we're not entirely sure, but we know there are only 2 votes in favor of Arius's position. We also know that there are some people who are Arius's big friends, and there's one absolutely critical guy called Eusebius of Nicomedia. And Eusebius of Nicomedia is one of these people who smiles and says, "Sure, I'll sign for this creed. I've got 30 years left of my life, and I'm going to spend every day trying to reverse it." And he does. So, yeah. But it's Arius who mainly gets all the blame. And think about it. If you're writing against a position, whatever it is, any era, you do a couple of things. The first thing you say is you try and pin it on a particular name. Okay? And that makes it seem as if it's that person, that man, that woman's vanity. And you also try and eliminate any suggestion that they have a mass following. So you have this image of, Arius speaking basically against the whole council. Now, in reality, he's got a huge amount of support of people who are not going to go against Constantine right now. But Constantine's got a few years left, and when he dies, we will be back. And that's the way a lot of religious argument happens in the ancient world. When historians write about arguments, they like these dates. 325, everything ends. And then you point out, excuse me, the empire is basically Arian 30 years later. Quiet. Okay? It just doesn't fit the neat narrative. Okay?
Can you talk a little bit about this impulse to monotheism
Yep.
here, and whether they found any evidence within the Bible itself for Trinity?
Yeah, the Trinity is interesting in terms of the Bible. People spend a lot of time, particularly in the Reformation era, trying to find Trinitarian doctrine. So, for instance, at the end of Matthew, you'll get, go and baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And you can find some cases like that, but overwhelmingly, what you're getting in the Bible is the Old Testament with the God of Judaism. And don't forget one thing. If you're a Christian through most of history, most of your organized prayers consist of the Psalms. If you're a monk, which most of these people are, they have daily prayer where it's Psalm, 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 and every word of it is about the one God and the evils of believing in multiple gods. So it's not surprising that you have this impulse, and people really have to fight hard to maintain the Trinitarian idea. And in the modern world, if you talk to Muslims, they might be very friendly to Christianity as a religion, but they'll say it's not monotheist, it's tritheist. You guys believe in three gods. Jews vary a lot on this, but there are certainly Orthodox rabbis who make the argument, if you're a Jew and you find yourself in a mosque, you can pray, because that's monotheist. If you're in a church, don't. That's tritheist. They believe in three gods there. That's polytheist. Interesting argument. And I'll just say one thing very quick before I let you go, which is you've got Ron Williams coming. One of my all-time favorite Ron Williams moments is when he's conducting a small service at an event in Washington where there have been a lot of Muslim speakers. And at his service, so many Muslims all come up to the communion rail to be blessed. They're obviously not taking communion, but they all want a blessing from a holy man. And I like that idea. Part 2 of the Synod of Nicea next time. Thank you very much.